Microsoft Defender for Office 365 quarantines potentially malicious and unwanted messages. Admins manage the quarantine for all users in their organizations. There are two options for doing that. The first is to monitor the quarantine for new messages, release the good ones, and maybe investigate and delete the bad ones. But there's a more efficient way for admins to manage the quarantine. Rather than monitoring it, let Microsoft Defender for Office 365 notify users when email is quarantined, so they can request the release of good messages. Then, just focus on these requests. To do that, you need to set up two policies. The first is a quarantine rule that defines the actions available to users. Add a new policy, give it a descriptive name, and choose the actions available. First, how do you want to handle releases? You can allow users to request release, allow them to release their own messages, or don't allow releases at all. Then, choose any additional actions you'd like to make available to users. They can optionally delete quarantine messages, preview them, or block the senders. In this scenario, I want to allow users to request release and enable all the available actions. Therefore, I'll just select Limited Access, because that's precisely what this option does. That's pretty much it. Later, when you define threat policies, you'll use this rule. But while you're here, also configure global settings, which define how notification emails look to users. You can provide a name, disclaimer, choose up to 3 languages, and optionally include the company logo in them. You use quarantine rules in almost all the Microsoft Defender for Office 365 threat policies, but I'm going to demonstrate them in an anti-spam policy. Create a new inbound policy, or edit an existing one. Name it appropriately, and choose the users, groups, and domains to which you want to apply it. I might normally apply this policy to the entire domain, but since I'm just testing this capability, I'll apply this policy to my pilot user. I'll skip straight to the Actions page and configure high confidence spam to go into quarantine. Now, I just need to select the quarantine policy that I created earlier. This policy will allow users to request releases. I'll select the same quarantine policy for phish, but I want to use a more restrictive policy for high confidence phish. There's no good reason to play around with email where certain contains phish. Last, I'll enable end-user spam notifications, so users receive these notifications, and then create the policy. As you might expect, threat policies are ordered by priority. The lower on the list, the more likely that policies above it will take precedence. So, arrange these policies to reflect your priorities. Now, when users receive spam, they'll see a notification in their inbox, about once a day. Depending on the actions you've allowed in the quarantine policy, they could choose to block the sender, request release, or maybe review the email, all right here. They can also manage their quarantine in Microsoft Defender for Office 365. The user selects the message and sees the options you've made available in the quarantine policy. To request release, the user selects Request Release and confirms the action. It couldn't be any easier for the end user to do. Back on your side, select a message where the release status is Release Requested. Several options are available at the top. You can approve the request, deny it, or possibly check into the email a little more before you take either action. I feel good about this one, so I'll approve the release. And report the message to Microsoft for analysis, which might keep similar messages out of quarantine in the future. One last tip. Quarantine can be a very busy queue, and sometimes you might miss these requests. To help, you can filter it to show only release requests, like I've done here. When allowing users to manage their own quarantine is not an option, allowing them to request releases is an efficient way to handle these messages. For more information, we encourage you to see our documentation on Microsoft Docs.